So we get to some printing. I wanted to give you guys a little short overview of the printer that I'm using. This is the RatRig printer that I built from a kit. As you can see, it's fully enclosed. I created all these panels on my CNC machine and using a Dragon high flow hot end. Obviously the printer has a pretty high build volume, 400 by 400 by 400, that allows me to print a lot of these parts. I also added a lot of panels. I engraved some of the panels on my CNC machine, added some LEDs. It actually gives it a good aesthetic, but it also allows some of these LEDs to be remotely controlled. So when I'm taking time-lapse videos, you know, the lighting is better. You know, anyway, probably not needed, but I think it gives it a good look. All these mods are on GitHub, and the link is in the description. So with that, let's start printing. Okay, so you can see some of the time lapses there from me printing. All the other parts were pretty much printed the same. And if you count here, after 17 spools of filament, all of the different parts of the model, you know, were printed. As you can see here, I used Polymaker PETG. It printed pretty well for me, and you'll begin to see some of these parts close up. So on to the next step, and that is starting the sanding process and a lot of the finishing process. Now, with that said, before we do, you know, before we do anything, I encourage you, don't attempt any of this stuff without proper PPE, protective equipment, right? I don't think you want fine PETG particles in your lungs. And the same thing goes, you'll see here that I use a process that utilizes resin. So you got to use gloves, you got to use some eye protection. And obviously when I use my sanding tools and some of the other things, I also like to use hearing protection. So this goes without saying, okay? Please do me a favor before you attempt any of this stuff, and use a nice, good respirator like this. A particular dust mask will probably be okay if you're sanding, but later on, when we get into painting and painting with some of the colors out of the spray cans that I show you, you gotta wear a respirator, okay? Or else all the stuff is just gonna get into your body, into your lungs, and believe me, a lot of these chemicals you do not want, okay? So I needed to take a pause here and really tell you guys this. It's an absolute must. A lot of these products are really not that expensive. All right, so with that said, let's get on to the next step. To the next step. All right, guys, here we are. And what I'm going to do here is I recorded a short video on the sanders that I use. As you can see, I use 3 different sanders. They're all powered. Okay. My recommendation is you can get some sanders out there that are actually battery powered. I would stay away from them because they just don't have enough power and you'll be recharging those batteries all the time. So I only use powered sanders. As you can see here, I use a small detail sander. This is made by Ryobi. You can pick it up at Home Depot. It's actually a pretty simple sander to use. Let me just grab the video here so you can see it. It has, triangle corners that you can get into a lot of details with. It's hook and loop. The bad thing about the sander is that it does not have any dust extraction. Okay, but when you really need to get into those small areas, really, really, really good sander. Another one here that you can see, it's actually a sander. It's called Bauer, but you can pick it up at Harbor Freight. I think it was like $25. It's really a great sander. It is also referred to as a mouse sander. Reason for that being is that it hook and loop, as you can see here. But the cool thing is it does have corners that again will allow you to get into detailed areas, but also dust extraction, right? That's something that I find out to be really good, especially not so much when you're sanding the plastic because the sandpaper does not tend to clog as much. But when you are sanding, let's say, a model that you've covered with resin, as you can see, we'll go through the process later, it really helps the sandpaper from not clogging up because it really extracts all the dust. And I really like sanders that have dust extraction. As you can see here, this one comes with usually have a little bag in the back here, but they also have adapters that you can just create a regular shop vacuum and extract the dust. And then another one here, this Craftsman one, you can actually pick it up at Lowe's. Really great sander, around $50, I believe. Now, they actually have a sander there that's made by DeWalt, and that sander is $75, $80, and it's the identical sander. I think they somehow OEM it. But this thing is really great. I got to tell you that I probably use this sander more than I use the other 2. Dust extraction, I actually printed a little adapter. I'll show you. Good thing about the sander, very low vibrations. Okay, when you're holding it, very comfortable, has a lot of power. Again, it's powered, corded, and you can use regular sandpaper. You can easily take the sandpaper out. Let me just play the video through here. You can see it has two little holes on the side here, 2 little levers. You take the sandpaper out. And the cool thing about this is you can use regular sheet paper that you can get at all these supply stores. I really like 3M, this free cut. It's really great paper that I find out. You can use here 120, I think, especially for initial sanding, and then you can go on to higher grades. But this is great paper. It doesn't clog. It really cuts well. Right, I find surfaces to be really smooth. It's a sandpaper that I've been using for a long time. Anything from 3M with free cut, I think you can pick them up at Home Depot. Again, relatively cheap. You could buy sheets and then cut them to size, to actually fit the sander. As you can see, there are holes here, but the sander comes with a plastic template that lets you cut these holes. So it basically, creates the dust extraction that that we talked about. Here's a little. Let me just grab a little bit. Again, they come with this little bag that you can see here that's meant for dust. But what I did is I actually printed an adapter. As you can see here, pretty simple adapter. Printed it out of PETG. Same PETG that I printed the whole model from. Measured the area here with the caliper, and then it just fits the sander really well with friction. I found that I didn't need any other sort of connection, and you can just attach your vacuum hose here, clamp it maybe with the clamp, and you can easily attach the sander to the vacuum. I think you can buy an adapter somewhere online. I think Amazon probably has these adapters, but hey, you have a 3D printer. You might as well use it. So a little bit short video on the sanders that I use. In case there are any questions, I can put links in the description here. I honestly, guys, don't attempt a model this size without having some sort of a power sander. It's just going to make your life that much easier, especially in the initial phases. There's always going to be a lot of hand sanding later on, especially in small detail areas, right? But in the beginning, when you really want to cut down those layer lines, and then you really want to bring the model, all of the parts of the model into a into a place where we're ready for actually priming and painting, these tools here are really going to make your life easier. Again, you can say, well, these are pretty big sanders. Well, guess what? We're building a pretty big model, right? So these sanders are great. You'll find them that they're easy to use. I'll fast forward next into a video here where you can see me sanding some of these parts, and we'll talk a little bit more about the process there and some of the things that you can look out for, when you're actually sanding the model. Okay, so let's do that next. All right, so let's talk a little bit about sanding here. Here's one of the parts that came out of the printer. As you can see, the indexing holes here that we've talked about, and as you can see, came out pretty good. A little bit of concern here. I guess the overhang here wasn't as good. I did not use any supports. Nothing that cannot be fixed. I'll show you how. And then a little bit over here, right? But overall, I mean, you can take a look here. This part is pretty clean, right? Let me see if I can get some different angles for you guys. You can see some of the, okay, right there. Right? Every print in the world looks really great when you look at it head on, but get a light overhead and you can really see some of the layer lines here. I can probably need to adjust my printer flow a little better. That will smooth some of these things out, but again, nothing really major. And overall, if you can see here, this part is pretty clean, especially again, every part in the world looking at it head on looks really great. You can see some of the layer lines. So you can see really clean print, especially given this is PETG, and PETG tends to be a little bit finicky with temperatures and all that. I think I have my printer pretty well calibrated. Bear in mind, I print very fast. I get 33 millimeters cubed on some of the infill. I think my exterior walls are around probably 70 or 90 millimeters. Interior walls can get up to 140, 150. And then, the infill, I can get all the way up to 200. So given the speed that I print at, I really say this is, this is pretty good. So the first step that I do here is before I do any other post-processing, you can see I have my, my sander here. I go over this entire print with 120 grit sandpaper. Okay, the sander makes this process pretty easy. Let me fast forward here a little bit so I can show you guys what's going on. Here is me starting the sanding process, and as you can see, just hold my sander. You can hold it any way you want. You can see I have the dust extraction going, and you don't really need to push really hard down on the part. Let the sander do the work for you, okay? The weight of the sander alone, resting on the part, is going to be more than enough for you to get what you want. Now, bear in mind you are sanding plastic, okay? This case is PETG. You might be sanding PLA, ABS, whatever it is, but no matter what the plastic is, if you keep the sander in one location, this thing is going to heat up, you're going to melt the plastic, and you're going to destroy the part, okay? Keep the sander moving, always. Look what I'm doing, right? I don't let the sander rest in one area. I see that it's actually sanding the area there, and I keep the sander moving. That is, one of the best advices, one of the best advice that I can give you is keep the sander moving, okay? If you keep it in one part, it's going to hit the part underneath. It's going to heat it up to the point where it's going to deform, and then hopefully not deform a lot. It does happen, right? Don't panic if that happens. If it deforms, let it cool down. Chances are you can fix that later on with using putty or some of the other things that I'm going to talk about. But if you keep the sander moving, you are never going to have that problem. Okay? Don't let it rest in one area. So now, go through the whole part doing this, right? Obviously here, it's very easy because these are areas that we can get very easy to. When you get here, you're probably only going to use the corner of the sander or pick up one of the other sanders, right? That's why we have a couple of sanders. You have that mouse sander that can really get into these areas here. You got the detailed sander. Now there's going to be areas where you're not going to be able to get with the sander. I recommend that some of the edges here, especially around here, even though you're not going to see them much, I also like to sand them. The more work that you do here, it's a long process. I get it. You want to see the model done. You want to see the model painted. If you take your time here, the model is really going to come out great. If you don't, it's going to be flawed. It's going to have layer lines. It's not going to come out as great. So put the work into it. The power sander is going to make it easy for you to actually get to a much better place. So I'm just going to fast scrub here. You can see here I'm changing sandpaper and I continue sanding this part. Let me see here if I get to an area where I can show you guys close up what it looks like. There you go. Okay, as you can see here, what I strive for is when you sand PETG, okay, you can see here from the light, the PETG, it's pretty shiny, okay? But once you sand it, as you can see, that shine goes down, as you can see here. And that's really what I strive for. I look for the shine to kind of like go away because that tells me I pretty much have sanded a lot of maybe some of these layer lines and a lot of the, maybe a little bit of areas of the flow not being accurate. You are always still going to have some shiny parts, like you can see a little bit here, right? From the light, you can proceed and sand this thing down further. Basically, when there are no shiny parts, this part is pretty flat, okay? But at this point, there's still going to be layer lines. Okay, depending also on the number of walls that you have on the model, you can just continue sanding. Be very careful, again, not to sand through the part. So you can completely eliminate those layer lines. And then there's a couple of steps that you can follow after this. I'll tell you the step that I follow, but I only sand down as deep as I can, see that a lot of the shine from the PETG has disappeared. It still leaves some layer lines behind, but I'll take care of those, in the next step. As you can see here, part now is really becoming to be pretty smooth, right? It was smooth to begin with from a printing perspective, but now after we went through some 120 grid, it's now becoming smooth. And really, this is the area where I like to bring the part here, before I proceed, with the next step. Now, the other thing that I'll tell you is, and I use this example to show you guys how I go through the sanding, it's always good that before you go to the next step that you actually glue your parts together, right? And you'll see what I mean there. I'll show you some examples. But that's a little bit on how your sanding should look like, the process that you should follow. Always keep moving the sander. You keep it in one place, you're going to destroy the part, and aim to basically get rid of the lot of shine. Again, it's PETG that you see here. Aim to, take a look at the part and have it become as smooth as it can possibly be at this stage, right? Because the next parts are gonna make it smoother. So that's a little bit on what I look for and how I proceed to sand all of the pieces, that we have together. You'll see a little more in the next steps here that we're gonna do here shortly. Okay, so here is our part all sanded like we described before. You can still see that it's a lot of the shine has gone away. Don't worry about that. It's going to come back soon, and I'll show you why. So a lot of the layer lines are really minimized at this point, but they're still there. And we want this, again, we're striving for a model that's gonna look like metal. I want this thing to be as smooth as possible. And you can see here a little bit of a hint as to what we're gonna do next. Okay, so what I do next in the process is I use craft resin, and I go over the entire model, all of the model components or pieces, if you will. Basically, this is resin that is UV cured. Here's my UV curing light, and you'll see all of the details of what I do and how I do it, because this resin actually is going to fill up all of the little gaps, all of the little layer lines in the model. The other thing that, again, you saw in the beginning, in order for me to print fast, I use a 0.6 millimeter nozzle. You could actually go up to 0.8. That allows you to print this parts really fast. But guess what? If you're using a 0.36 or 0.42 layer height, obviously you're going to have big layers here, and there's going to be big gaps between those layers. Sanding took those things down, but the resin, it's really going to take those down further. Now, some people say, well, why do you have to use resin? I can use primer or filler. By all means, okay? Go use primer or filler. The thing is if you're going to use primer or filler, I would sand this thing down further. And then what you would do is you would use primer, filler, spray the whole model, sand the whole model down again, spray the whole model again, sand the whole model down again, because the primer filler is not as thick as resin, and you're going to need 2 or 3 different coats in order for you to be able to eliminate those layer lines. So you can absolutely do that. I think resin saves a lot of the sanding afterwards. Sand in the beginning, pull the resin, sand afterwards, and I think you're pretty much ready to paint. And anyway, you'll see that. So with that said, let's scrap this video here. Here is the resin that I use. I picked this thing at Amazon. It's a UV resin. It's clear, 500 grams. This is, I think, craft resin. So you can use to craft different items with. I found this, I find the consistency of it to be okay. It cures very well. Now, nothing to keep you from actually using printing resin, right? A lot of the SLA printers out there, you can get a lot of resin. There's a lot of people on YouTube, as you've probably seen. You can go do a search that they use printer resin, SLA printer resin, to actually do this. That will absolutely also work here. I can only tell you that this is the resin that I used, and the results that I got are great if you want to follow exactly. But feel free to experiment. I think any sort of UV resin here that's either adequate for printing or adequate for crafting, it's really going to do the work for you. The one remaining item here is I use a couple of, let me see, get a point here. You can see I use a couple of silicone brushes, a broad one and also a very narrow one that, as you can see here, allows me to get into some of the, here's a better view of the brushes. It gets into a lot of the areas here, a lot of the channels I'm pointing the mouse at. The broad one actually allows you to spread the resin uniformly in large parts of the model. You can absolutely use a regular brush, right? Something that's kind of like disposable. You can always clean all these tools. You know, if you have any resin left on these brushes, just cure it. It peels right off because this is silicone. You can pick these things up. They're called makeup silicone brushes. You can pick them up for a couple of dollars on Amazon or really anywhere, any craft store. I find these spread the resin very easily, very well. Any sort of brush, you know, cheap acrylic brush will also do. You can always clean the brushes afterwards with alcohol, so you can, you know, you can reuse them. So the other thing that you need is obviously some sort of a curing lamp or a curing station. Let me just see what I'm using here. I got this thing at Amazon. It's Everbeam. I think it was about 40 bucks. The resin that I use here, strive for a resin. Usually when you buy these resins, they tell you exactly the wavelength of light that you need in order to cure the resin. This resin here, 365 nanometer wavelength, I find out cures it extremely fast and really well. Now, also, this is a 50 watt light. what I do is once you have the resin, you work in sections, okay? You're not going to go resin the entire part. You work in sections, you cure the resin, and then you move up and you move on into a different section. Now, nothing to keep you from curing it really quick with a light like this, maybe a few seconds. Even though the resin is not going to be fully cured, you can put the part out in the sun, right? And that will cure it. You can also build yourself a curing box. It's very simple. You get some UV LEDs, place some aluminum foil in the box, put the LEDs in there and put your part in there. Many different ways of curing. Again, if you do a search on YouTube, how to cure resin, you'll come up with hundreds of examples of what people have built to be able to cure resin. But here are the parts that I use. I wanted to detail that for you guys. 265 nanometer light. This is really great for curing this resin. So it has a switch, and here's a little bit of the process. Another reminder here. I know I had a little short section in the video. Please use gloves, use a respirator. Especially, a lot of these resins are somewhat odorless. Not really, but some are. But when they cure, they really emit a lot of fumes. You do not want to breathe these fumes, okay? A regular dust mask is not going to do it. You need a quality respirator, one that is also used for a lot of auto body work, because this is really going to fill. It has a carbon activated filter cartridges in here that are really going to filter out a lot of the fumes. I can't say this enough. I'll keep repeating it. Don't even do this if you do not have gloves, you don't have a respirator. Please, guys, go out there and make sure you use the PPE before you actually attempt anything, okay? So with that, let's take a look at the process here. Here's the part. Here's our resin. Here's our light. There's like switched on here. And here's the process that I follow. I spread a little bit of the resin. I work in sections. I use my silicone brush to brush it pretty evenly. As you can see, it could be a little runny. You can see there's a little run here, but you can, if you see the resin running, just make sure to work in brushing. And now pay attention here, right? We want to retain these lines. These are part of the model. So don't let resin get in there. You can if resin does get in there, use the smaller brush here to sort of like brush it out before you cure it. We do not want to hide these lines. We want to keep them because they're part of the detail of the model. You can always, use a razor later if you get some resin in there and actually carve the line out. But be careful. The more work that you put on doing this up front, if it drips, just pick it up, just like I'm doing there. Put it back, and because you sanded that model, you'll also find out that the resin is spreading pretty easily, okay? And you can easily tell where you have resin versus you don't have resin, because again, as you put the resin on, you can easily see where you have placed it, okay? So continue. Notice that with the silicone brush, it goes on very smooth. You can see I have some, I do some strokes here to smooth it out further. I need some more, I put a little more. Now, if you have a brush, regular like acrylic brush, you can put it in a little container and just dip the brush in it and also brush it on the metal. Really, no defined way of doing it. But we can see here how thin it is. I don't layer on very thick. It covers nicely. I try for a nice even coat, because the more work that you do here, if I put a big blob of resin here, right, and then I cure it, guess what? It's the more work that I'm going to do later to have to sand it down. So you don't need to blob it on. Just put enough to cover the model in a nice, even coat, as I'm doing here. Again, the silicone brush, you can actually see the thickness here as I move the model around and the light shines, like right there. You see? It's a nice, even coat. Not very thick at all. Try to get it as smooth as possible. And once you're ready, put the brush down, turn the light on, and cure it. Now, you don't need to aim for a final cure here. You just aim for enough of this resin to harden. because final curing will come later. You can put it in a curing box, or again, just leave it out in the sun. And it will really cure this resin. I found this resin to be really good. 50-watt light really does a good job on it. As you can see here, bring the part back. Okay, look at that. Completely dry in the little time that I put the light on there. Okay, nice and smooth. And look, the shine came back. That is a welcome effect of curing resin. You know why? Because when we start sanding again, guess what? Once we sand until that shine has gone away, this part is dead flat. Okay? Do it with 120. Go as high as 150 right now. It will be dead flat. And guess what? You put one primer coat on this, maybe put a higher grit sandpaper after that, it will be smooth as glass. That is the process that has worked for me. As you can see here, as you put the resin down, maybe there's a little bit of dust. You can begin to see also there's a little bit of showing of a grain, right? It becomes a little grainy as it has cured. But, you know, just continue that process for the other parts. Notice what I did here. I'm working in sections, okay? I did this one big section here. I cured it. I'll go on to the next section. Okay, now what you could also do is you can put resin on these edges here. Okay, this little part here. Now, if you have some gaps like this, you know, etc., this is where, you know, spot putty. Okay, this right here is probably going to become your best friend in covering some of these little imperfections. It's an absolute incredible product. Again, please use a respirator when you're using it. It does have some nasty fumes. Put some gloves on, but you know, you take a little bit of this putty. And again, you can see many videos on YouTube, people using it, and they swear by it. It's absolutely, you know, a great product. So that when you do have, you know, you can see here, there's a little bit of an imperfection on this area here. You take the spot putty, spread it across here. It dries relatively quickly. So after maybe 10-15 minutes, you can begin to sand it. Now, you could actually also put resin here, right, and cure it, sand it down, and if you have more gaps, put the putty over it. Or what you could do is you can put the putty down, let the putty dry, and put resin over that. Either way, I have found I never had any issues. Now, this is this putty is really not meant to cover massive gaps. You know, if you have a gaping hole here, you cannot use this putty to do that. You need filler, because as the putty dries, it's going to crack. It's really, again, it's meant for little imperfections. And as you spread this thing out and as you sand, you find little imperfections in your print. You know, use the spot putty, and it's really going to help you, you know, with a little bit of sanding to get rid of some of those imperfections. Okay, so that's the process we're going through here. Let me see if there's anything else I wanted to show you guys. I'm just doing some more spreading of the resin here. Same process. As you can see, I work in sections. The cool thing about this resin, you know, let me just say another thing here, is I've seen some people that actually went out and they got some sort of, there's a product out there that is a 2-part A and B, that actually you can mix it together and it hardens and people spread it over their prints. Another thing is, you know, some people use resin from Bundo. It's acrylic resin that, again, requires part A and part B. Here's the thing with all these resins, with part A and part B. You only have a limited time to work with them, right? Most of them are good for up to maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and then it hardens. So, you know, what are you going to do? Keep mixing and keep working in sections? I find that extremely difficult, especially. It might be good for smaller models, but for bigger models like this, I really can't say enough about, you know, UV resin, because you have all the time in the world to make sure that your resin here is nice and smooth when you apply it, and it's only going to harden when you apply the light to it, when you apply the UV light. So you have a lot of time to work and getting the part to look the way you want to, and the fact that you work in sections, you know, allows you to get that done. Okay, so that's a little bit on the process that I use. after I sand, again here, I'll probably either fill it with resin, as you can see the layer lines here of the overhangs, or I would put some spot putty down, sand it, and then put resin over it. You know, again, pay attention to these details, guys. You know, it's easy to do this part here, but these details here, even though this foot is going to point down and you're not going to see this, you know, strive for as much perfection as you can. It's not really going to take a lot of time. And the more of this you do, the better your model is going to look. Okay, to the point where you're probably not going to see any layer lines. Is it okay if you left it like this? Yes, this foot is going to point down. Nobody's going to see it anyway. But, you know, take your time. You have the resin handy. You can put some resin down. It's going to make this a lot better. You know, especially it's the difference is in the details, as they say, right? The more time that you take to get these details looking right, the better your model is going to look. Okay, so that's a little bit on the resin process. I will tell you what I do after this.